So welcome to our June Planet Possible MiniPod. I'm Niki Roach, and this is a monthly update where we react to current events in water, climate and nature. And it's a mini-pod because it'll only take about 15 minutes of your time, and it means you get a Planet Possible episode every 2 weeks. We're really grateful to our sponsors, BMA, Mackley and MWH Treatment for helping us bring this mini-pod to you. And as usual, I'm joined by an environmental expert, and we're going to explore 3 issues that are making the headlines this mini-pod. My guest is the journalist Phoebe Weston. Phoebe's a Biodiversity Reporter at the Guardian newspaper, and we'll be talking about the news that water contamination by forever chemicals from an airport in eastern France, 4 times above the accepted limits, has resulted in 3,000 vulnerable residents unable to drink their tap water. A groundbreaking tree planting programme that's uniting farmers and rewilders as portions of common ground in the Yorkshire Dales National Park are being restored to their ancient glory. And the stat that almost 60% of adults in the UK think climate and the environment are important issues. We'll explore the role of the media in sharing the evidence and the actions people can take. So welcome to Planet Possible, Phoebe. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on, Niki.
So I'm really keen to hear about your latest story that you're just about to break in The Guardian.
I've just come back from a reporting trip down to eastern France, looking into a story of a water ban that's impacting 60,000 people living in 11 communes. The reason why this ban is happening is because authorities detected 4 times the accepted level of PFAS in drinking water. They've said that out of those 60,000 people, they consider 3,000 to be in the vulnerable category. So these are children under the age of 2, pregnant or breastfeeding women, and people with weak immune systems. And they've been told that they should not be drinking the tap water until the end of this year, by which point the authorities are going to improve the water system so they will be back below this EU limit of 0.1 micrograms per litre. There are health impacts associated with high levels of PFAS in water. So it's associated with immune issues, thyroid issues, fertility issues. It's linked with some cancer. We don't know in this case whether those residents will be experiencing any health impacts because there's not been any research on that, but that's certainly a concern for the people who've been living there. The source of this contamination is from the Bwlb airport, which is really close to all these villages. They'd been using these firefighting foams from the 70s up until 2017, when they stopped using them because they got a foam which didn't contain PFAS. So they're using certified foams, and I know these foams are commonly used in airports around the world. They were leaking into the soils beneath the airport and into contaminating the groundwater, which is then going into people's homes. And so it's likely that this contamination has been going on for decades, although the ban was only put in place at the start of May. It appears that government data showed a spike in PFAS in 2017, but for whatever reason that wasn't passed on to the relevant authorities. There's a lot of anger from residents about the fact that they have probably been contaminated for a pretty long period of time. When did you first hear about PFAS from the airport?
November 2023.
Who told you?
Our colleague from ADRA knows that the airports have a PFAS problem coming from the firemen.
The government's giving out €80 per person to pay for bottled water, but lots of people who are not in those vulnerable categories are also choosing to drink bottled water. And frankly, if I lived down there, I'd probably choose to drink bottled water as well, because it's horrible knowing that you are drinking in such high levels of PFAS.
So it's really interesting that this region is aware of the levels of PFAS and is doing something about it. Tell me a little bit about the European regulatory landscape around these kind of forever chemicals.
This is currently France's largest ban on drinking tap water, but in January 2026, the EU is going to impose this threshold of 0.1 micrograms per litre across member states. This story that we're seeing in this area in eastern France around Saint-Louis is likely to become a story that is repeated in many other places, because currently there are 34 communes in France where PFAS in drinking water exceeds the new EU limit. So this was 0.9% of all samples taken. There's obviously been this brilliant reporting with the Forever Pollution Project, identifying how many sites across Europe are contaminated with PFAS. And they found more than 23,000 sites. And of those, 2,300 are considered hazardous, i.e. they exceed this EU threshold. When this law comes in January, it's likely we're going to see this story cropping up in a number of other places as basically people get much more serious about PFAS.
Okay, so you grew up on a farm and you're interested in how agriculture and nature collide. So I'm interested to hear about this next story, bringing together farmers and rewilders in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. Tell us all.
I've been reporting for The Guardian for about 5 years, and one theme that comes up in reporting is the conflict between farming and conservation. So farming covers approximately 70% of the UK, and we are often looking for nature-friendly ways of farming, ways in which we can introduce more wildlife into our farmed landscapes. We know that globally, farming is the main driver of biodiversity loss. Making space for nature on farmland is seen as a way to address that issue. I've noticed that farmers and conservationists often really don't get on, and there can be antagonism between them, particularly with rewilding and farmers concerned that conservationists are going to start introducing wolves and lynx and stuff. And I absolutely love this story that's happening in the Yorkshire Dales National Park because it shows what can happen when farmers and conservationists collaborate. This area that I was looking at is called the Howgill Fells, which confusingly is in Cumbria, but it's actually in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. The Woodland Trust and Natural England have been working with commoners, so these are farmers who have rights to graze on these upland areas, to put in tree planting schemes, essentially fencing off areas of the fell. So the bit I looked at is about 12% of the entire T-Bay Fell. So sheep can't get in and they're planting trees in them. So what they've done is to create a bit more complexity in this upland landscape. There's still space for sheep farming, and the commoners are being compensated for loss of grazing land. So they're being paid essentially to have these enclosures on the land and to remove some of their livestock. So they're happy with the situation. Hill farmers in the UK are working on very small margins. So these sources of income are really important to them. I went to look at one of these enclosures to see how wildlife is coming back, and it's absolutely amazing. So before the enclosure was created in the area we were looking at, which is just above T-Bay Village, there were probably about 4 breeding birds, so meadow pipits, skylarks, wren and grey wagtail. The enclosure was put in around 12 years ago, and now there are 14 breeding bird species in that area. So they've come back really quickly. There are some indications in these enclosures that this would have been woodland hundreds of years gone by. Pete Leeson from the Woodland Trust, who showed me around the enclosure, calls them ghost woodlands. They're an indication that woodland habitat should be here. Where have these birds come from?
So this is the other exciting thing about this enclosure, is that we haven't really got wooded and scrubby habitats alongside it. So it's taken up, as a result of that, it's taken longer for the birds to find this enclosure. So in other enclosures we've had willow warblers breeding by year 6 or 7. Here it was year 10 or 11 before they started to breed. And I think that's because they're coming from elsewhere. They're additional birds that are looking for territories away from established breeding areas.
It was a brilliant story because it shows how you can create space for nature and also benefit farmers at the same time. So it was just a brilliant story of a successful collaboration. And it was genuinely like a complete joy. I was there at 5:30 in the morning and it was like a symphony of birdsong. It was really beautiful.
Phoebe, tell me about where the funding has come from for this project.
So it was possible because of a 10-year government agri-environment scheme, which was signed by the farmers with rights to graze the fell, as well as the owners of the fell, and it was supported and monitored by the Woodland Trust.
And you mentioned something that really stuck out to me at the start of this story, which is that it's commoner farmers. So it's not one landowner, it's common land and therefore multiple farmers, I'm imagining. Tell me how that works, because that sounds more complicated than a sort of single farmer relationship to manage.
We often see people doing tree planting on private land, but the fact that it was done on common land and involved so many people to agree to do it is really special. This is quite an interesting model for other upland areas where we have commoners' rights in terms of grazing. If agreements could be reached on those areas as well, we could see more tree planting like this in our upland areas, which are generally quite devoid of trees. It'd be good to see some more trees up there.
How did the farmers that you spoke to feel about it?
They were positive about it. I think when it was first suggested, they were a bit worried that this was a way of Natural England getting them to remove their sheep off the fell. They felt that they wouldn't be able to carry on farming in the way that they have done. But actually, now they feel positive about it. I think they've enjoyed their interactions with Pete and his team from the Woodland Trust, and they are importantly being financially remunerated for having these enclosures on their land. And also the way that the enclosures have been done, they're on bits of the fell that were less good for grazing land, often up ravines and areas around the river. So for the farmers, that loss of grazing land is not so great as if it were elsewhere. So it's been done in a really thoughtful way.
Lovely to hear a story with some positivity, really, where nature and farming come together. I think it does more than we realise, isn't it? Sometimes that narrative of tension and conflict is one that pervades, but actually on the ground, often farmers are some of our strongest custodians of the landscape, aren't they, really? It's just about working out how we enhance and improve and work with them to do that.
Yeah, and I think 70% in the UK, I mean, if you can't involve farmers, that's a lot of land that you need to work with farmers.
Absolutely. Yeah, for so many challenges, not just biodiversity, water quality, there's lots of overlap, isn't there? Okay, we're going to have to move on, as much as I would love to talk to you about this for ages, and we'll pop a link to the article that you wrote in the show notes, so if people want to find out more, they can go and read the full article. I wanted to use your experience and hear your reflections as a professional journalist on how much people care about climate and the environment, and I guess whether this is reflective of what's reported and how it's reported in the media. So let's start with a bit of data for you, Phoebe. So the latest stats from the Office of National Statistics show that almost 60% of adults in the UK think that climate and environment are important issues. The proportion of businesses that are very or somewhat concerned has fallen, interestingly, from 40%, 4 in 10 in February last year, to less than 3 in 10 by the end of last year. The main things that people think that climate change has impacted them personally through are strong winds, flooding, heat waves, and interestingly, reduced access to safe and affordable food, given that we were just talking about farming. And 65% of respondents thought climate change would impact them in the future by increased heat, flooding and stronger winds in the next 10 years. So I'll pop a link to the survey in the show notes if you want to read more, because there is tons of detail sitting behind these figures. So what I think was positive is that 3/4 of adults in the UK reported to having made changes in their lifestyle to help tackle climate change. So that was things like changing their shopping habits, changing their travel, diet, and changes in their gardens. And for those who haven't taken action, and this is where I think it's really interesting, over 40% said it was because they felt that the changes wouldn't have any impact. Throwing into that the discussion of the 89% project, which is new to me, but it's this year-long global journalistic effort to explore the fact that actually between 80 and 89% of the global population want governments to take stronger action on climate change. But their challenge is that this fact isn't represented in news coverage. So I know that The Guardian have signed up to the 89% project. I'm interested, Phoebe, what are your reflections on how climate and nature stories are covered in mainstream media, and maybe what more we can do to show that kind of majority of people that this is the reality, and also to help reach that percentage of people that don't feel like there's anything that they can do to make a difference?
The way that we tell the story about nature loss is shifting from something that's just sort of a nice to have to really essential to the healthy functioning of our planet. So we know that we need natural ecosystems to suck in carbon so that we can reach our net zero targets. We also need healthy ecosystems to have clean water, healthy food. We need pollinators. So I think the way that we think about biodiversity loss is becoming more akin to the way that we think about the climate crisis, i.e., even if you don't care about wildlife, you should care about the biodiversity crisis, because it is about humans at the end of the day.
And there's a really clear link, isn't there, between food security and biodiversity, because actually we need a complicated ecosystem in order to deliver food and healthy soils.
And we need pollinators.
Yeah.
On climate as well, climate was seen as something that was happening in the future, or it's happening to people in other countries. And I really think that this story is shifting so quickly in the UK over the last few years. And people are seeing that this is something that's impacting us intimately. So remember the 40-degree summer a few years back. It's events like that that make people stop and think climate change is here. And it's not just an environmental thing. It's a human well-being issue. It's about us being able to live on a habitable planet. So I think, in a sense, the speed at which climate change is moving is helping us tell this story journalistically, because it is here and now. It's no longer an academic thing or something we're projecting for the future.
The people that were most engaged were people that were living in affluent areas, that were degree educated, and the people that were least engaged were those living in more deprived areas, for example. There's quite a good chunk of people that feel either completely disengaged or don't feel like they have any ability to do anything about it. Are we reaching those people? And if not, I guess, how do we do that better?
Before the last general election, I went to Ilford on the outskirts of London to do a vox pop asking people about their concerns about nature and climate, and people, they weren't worried about that. They're worried about their bills going up. Politicians don't do a good job of making people understand those links, the importance of climate change to human well-being.
If you want to find out more about the topics we've talked about today and the articles that Phoebe's written, I'll put some links in the show notes. Thank you for joining us on the MiniPod. You can subscribe to Planet Possible on your usual podcast player to never miss an episode, and click the link in the show notes to join our mailing list to be the first to hear about those new episodes. We've got even more fantastic guests and topics lined up for the rest of the year, so I hope you join us for those too. That's it, everyone. Stay curious, stay connected, and we'll see you next time.